I remember the afternoon I understood I wasn't dying, I was being managed. It was November 2023, in a small bungalow outside Dayton, and I lay in the back bedroom with the door cracked open, recovering from pneumonia that had scared everyone more than it scared me. The house was quiet in that winter afternoon way, the furnace ticking, the refrigerator cycling through its hum. Then I heard voices at the kitchen table. My sister, my son, his wife. They thought I was asleep. They used words like arrangements, DNR, and split fairly, as if I were a ledger to be balanced. No anger came. Just a stillness, like when snow starts and the road goes soundless. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't call out. I listened. By the end of the hour, I understood the shape of it, grief rehearsed as strategy. I also understood I wasn't done living. Not by years. Not by decades. And certainly not on their timeline. What happened next wasn't about revenge. It was about doors. Putting them back on their hinges. Let me tell you how it began. Ellen Margaret Carver was 58 years old when the pneumonia arrived. She had been a purchasing coordinator for 29 years at a regional distribution company, retiring at 56 with a pension and modest savings carefully accumulated over 3 decades of disciplined work. Widowed at 49 when her husband Michael died suddenly of a heart attack in their driveway on a Saturday morning, she had raised 2 children largely on her own through the difficult years that followed. Her son, Thomas, was 40 years old and worked as a project manager for a logistics firm in downtown Dayton, managing supply chain operations for automotive parts manufacturers throughout the Midwest. Her daughter, Catherine, was 37 and lived overseas in Frankfurt, Germany, where she worked in international education as a curriculum developer for corporate language training programs. The bungalow Ellen owned outright sat on a corner lot with a mature maple tree out front and a chain-link fence in the back that needed repair but remained functional. By most measures, her life was unremarkable in its ordinariness. She paid her bills on the first of the month without fail, maintaining a checking account balance that never dipped below $2,000. She kept her prescriptions organized in a weekly pill box she refilled every Sunday evening while watching the news. She attended a book club at the library on Tuesday evenings when the weather was fair, discussing novels with 7 other women ranging in age from 52 to 74. She voted in every election, local and national, arriving at the polling place when it opened at 6:30 in the morning. She did not travel much, having taken only 3 vacations in the past decade, twice to visit Catherine in Germany and once to Sanibel Island with her sister Ruth. She did not spend extravagantly, buying her clothes at department store sales and driving a 12-year-old Honda Civic with 148,000 miles on the odometer. She lived with the particular dignity of someone who had learned early that survival did not require performance, that security came from discipline rather than display. The pneumonia began as a cough in late October, dry and persistent, appearing first on a Wednesday evening after she had spent the afternoon raking leaves. By the second week of November, it had worsened into a fever that would not break despite over-the-counter medications and rest. Her temperature climbed to 102.4 degrees. Her breathing became labored, each inhalation requiring conscious effort. Her son Thomas drove her to the emergency room on a Thursday afternoon when she called him, her voice thin and strained, saying she couldn't catch her breath. She was admitted through the emergency department after a chest X-ray revealed significant consolidation in her right lower lobe. The attending physician, a young woman named Dr. Morrison, used words like consolidation and hypoxia and observation. She explained that Ellen's oxygen saturation was at 87%, dangerously low, requiring supplemental oxygen through a nasal cannula. Ellen spent 6 nights in a shared room on the 4th floor with a curtain between beds, her roommate an elderly woman with congestive heart failure who coughed through the nights. She was discharged on a Tuesday with a prescription for antibiotics, amoxicillin clavulanate, 825 milligrams twice daily for 10 days, a nebulizer she was to use twice daily with albuterol solution, and instructions to rest, hydrate, and follow up with her primary physician within 1 week. Thomas picked her up from the hospital at 11 in the morning. He drove her home in his silver sedan, a Honda Accord with leather seats and a navigation system that announced every turn in a pleasant female voice. He carried her overnight bag to the porch and unlocked the door with a key he had asked for months earlier, in July, saying it was just in case she ever needed help and couldn't get to the door. Ellen had not questioned it then, seeing it as practical. She was too tired to question it now. Her body felt hollowed out, her muscles weak, her lungs still tight. The house smelled stale when they entered, the air thick with the particular mustiness of a home that had been closed up for nearly a week. The heat had been turned down to 60 degrees to save energy while she was gone. Thomas adjusted the thermostat back up to 68, the temperature Ellen preferred. He set her bag in the hallway beside the coat closet and told her he would be back the next day with groceries. Ellen nodded, too exhausted to speak. She moved slowly to the back bedroom, her steps unsteady, holding the wall for balance. She changed into loose cotton pajamas that smelled like the lavender sachets she kept in her dresser drawers, and lay down on top of the quilt her mother had made 30 years earlier, its pattern faded but still intact. The room was dim. Light came through the window in pale November bands, filtering through the sheer curtains she had hung when Michael was still alive. She closed her eyes. She heard Thomas leave. She heard the front door close. She heard the lock turn from the outside with a definitive click that registered somewhere in her consciousness, but did not alarm her. She slept until evening. When she woke, it was dark outside. The room was cold again. The thermostat must have been set to a schedule she didn't remember programming. The house was silent except for the furnace ticking on in the basement, the sound traveling through the ductwork like a series of small metallic breaths. Ellen sat up slowly, aware of the tightness in her chest, the effort required to draw a full breath. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and stood, gripping the nightstand until her balance steadied. She walked to the kitchen, each step deliberate, her slippers scuffing against the hardwood floor. A casserole dish sat on the counter, covered in aluminum foil that had been crimped tightly around the edges. A note was taped to the foil in her sister Ruth's precise handwriting, written in blue ballpoint pen: chicken and rice. Heat at 350 for 20 minutes. Call if you need anything. Love, Ruth. Beside it was a printed schedule taped to the refrigerator with 4 small magnets shaped like ladybugs. The schedule was formatted like a spreadsheet, with days of the week listed down the left side and names, phone numbers, and tasks listed across in neat columns. Monday, Ruth, groceries, 9 a.m. Tuesday, Janelle, drive to follow-up appointment with Dr. Patel, 2 p.m. Wednesday, neighbor Carol, sit with Ellen in the afternoon, 1 to 4 p.m. Thursday, Thomas, pharmacy pickup, medications ready by 10 a.m. Friday, Ruth, check-in visit, morning. The schedule continued through the following 2 weeks. Ellen studied the schedule. It was organized, efficient, color-coded with yellow highlighting for medical appointments and blue highlighting for grocery deliveries. It looked like something produced in a corporate meeting, printed on quality paper, the font professional and easy to read. She touched the edge of the paper. It was laminated. Someone had taken the time to laminate it. She opened the refrigerator. It had been completely restocked. Milk in a glass bottle, the kind from the local dairy. Eggs in a carton, marked organic. Bread in a bag, whole wheat from the bakery she liked. Butter, real butter, not margarine. Deli meat in labeled containers, turkey breast, low sodium, the labels written in Ruth's handwriting. Orange juice. Yogurt cups, vanilla and strawberry. Cheese slices. Baby carrots in a plastic bag. Everything was aligned, labels facing forward, organized by category. Someone had spent time arranging it all. Ellen closed the door slowly. She noticed the spare key was not on its usual hook by the back door. It had hung there for years, a brass key on a rubber loop, positioned precisely 3 feet from the doorframe. She had hung it there herself when they first moved into the house 26 years ago. Now the hook was empty, just the small metal curve protruding from the wall. Ellen walked back to the bedroom. She did not turn on the overhead light. She sat on the edge of the bed and breathed carefully, counting the seconds in and out. 4 seconds in, hold for 4, 6 seconds out, the way the respiratory therapist at the hospital had shown her, a young man named David who had been patient and thorough. She thought about the schedule. She thought about the lamination. She thought about the key. She thought about the phrase, just in case, and how it had transformed from precaution to possession. She did not sleep well that night. She woke every 2 hours, her internal clock disrupted by the hospital routine that had imposed itself on her body. Each time she woke, she listened to the house. She heard the furnace. She heard the refrigerator. She heard the clock in the living room marking seconds. She heard nothing unusual. But something felt different. The house felt watched, or perhaps prepared. Prepared for what, she didn't yet know. The next morning, Thomas arrived at 9 o'clock sharp. He let himself in without knocking. Ellen was in the kitchen, heating water for tea in the electric kettle Michael had given her on their 20th anniversary. She was still in her nightgown and robe, not having had the energy yet to dress. Thomas wore a collared shirt and khakis, dressed for work, but taking the morning off, he said, to check on her. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice carrying the particular brightness people use when speaking to the ill or very old. "Better every day," Ellen said. It was true. Her breathing was easier. Her fever had not returned. Her body was beginning to remember its strength. Thomas opened the refrigerator, scanned the contents with the practiced eye of someone conducting inventory, and closed it again. He picked up a prescription bottle from the counter, the amoxicillin clavulanate, read the label, checked the date, and set it back down precisely where it had been. "You're taking these twice a day," he said. It was not a question. "I am." "Good," he nodded, his expression satisfied. "And the nebulizer?" "Twice a day." "Good." He lingered in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, his hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. Ellen poured the hot water over a tea bag Earl Grey, her preferred morning tea, and watched the water darken. She did not ask him to sit. She did not offer him coffee. After a moment, he glanced at his watch and said he needed to get to the office, but would be back that evening to bring dinner. Ellen nodded. He left. She heard the front door close. She heard the lock click again, that same definitive sound, louder now that she was listening for it. She carried her tea to the small table by the window and sat in the chair that faced the street. The maple tree outside had lost most of its leaves. The branches were dark against the gray November sky, stark and skeletal. A few brown leaves still clung stubbornly, twisting in the wind. She sipped her tea slowly, holding the warm mug between both hands. She thought about the word good, the way he had said it twice, as if approving a task completed, as if checking boxes on a list. She thought about the phrase, "I need to get to the office," suggesting that being here was an obligation, a duty, something requiring sacrifice or adjustment. That afternoon, Ruth stopped by with more food, a lasagna this time, also wrapped in aluminum foil, also with a note detailing reheating instructions. She stayed for 15 minutes, asking questions in a cheerful, measured tone that reminded Ellen of nurses doing their rounds. Had Ellen used the nebulizer that morning? Yes. Was she drinking enough water? Yes, 3 full glasses so far. Did she need anything from the pharmacy? No, Thomas was handling that. Was she feeling short of breath? Only when climbing stairs. Ruth made notes on her phone, typing with her thumbs, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Before she left, she hugged Ellen carefully, her hands barely touching Ellen's back, as if Ellen were made of porcelain and might crack under pressure, and said, "We're taking care of everything. You just focus on getting better." Ellen said, "Thank you," she meant it. She was grateful. But gratitude and unease were beginning to occupy the same space in her chest. After Ruth left, Ellen walked through the house slowly, room by room, taking inventory. She checked the windows, all locked, as she had left them. She checked the doors front, back, basement, all locked. She opened the drawer in the small desk in the living room where she kept important papers. Her will was there, the one she had made 8 years earlier when Michael died, notarized and witnessed by 2 bank employees whose names she had since forgotten. Her insurance documents were there, homeowner's policy, auto policy, health insurance cards. Her deed was there, recorded in Montgomery County, showing her as sole owner of the property since Michael's death, his name removed through the probate process. Everything appeared to be in order, exactly as she had left it. She opened her purse, a brown leather handbag she had carried for 5 years. Her wallet was in the inside zippered pocket where she always kept it. But something was wrong. It sat differently, the leather creased in an unfamiliar way. She opened the wallet. The cards were in the wrong order. Her driver's license, usually in the front clear slot, was in the back slot behind her library card. Her credit card, usually behind the license, was now in front. Her health insurance card was where her grocery store rewards card usually sat. Someone had removed the contents and replaced them incorrectly, not knowing her system. Ellen sat on the couch, her purse in her lap. She did not touch the wallet again. She simply noted the placement, the wrongness of it. She noted the laminated schedule. She noted the missing key. She noted the lock clicking from the outside. She noted the way Thomas had checked her medications as if auditing her compliance. She noted the way Ruth had made notes on her phone, documenting her condition. She was being helped. She understood that. People who loved her were organizing care, demonstrating concern. But help had acquired a shape, a structure, a hierarchy. And she was not at the top of it. She was at the center of it, but not in control of it. 2 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, Ellen dozed in the back bedroom. The door was open a few inches, the way she preferred it, allowing air to circulate but maintaining privacy. The heat vent near the floor carried sound from the kitchen with remarkable clarity, a quirk of the house's original design from 1974, when these bungalows had been built quickly and cheaply for young families moving to the suburbs. Ellen was not fully asleep. She was in that space between waking and sleeping, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and steady, her mind floating. She heard the front door open. She heard voices. She heard the chairs slide across the linoleum floor. She remained still. Ruth's voice, clear and businesslike. "We should agree now. It's easier to have consensus before things get complicated." Janelle's voice, quieter but firm. "Hospice has great resources. I looked into 3 different providers. They all offer end-of-life planning services." Thomas's voice, steady and measured. "Let's be realistic. She's recovering now, but she's 58. The pneumonia was serious. We need to plan for next time." "Ruth, the house should sell quickly if we list in spring. The market always improves after winter." "I spoke to a realtor, just informally. She said homes in this neighborhood are moving in 30 to 45 days. Janelle, what about the pension? Does it transfer or terminate?" "Thomas, terminates. But there's a small life insurance policy through her former employer. 50,000. Split 2 ways." "Ruth, split 3 ways. You, me, Catherine." "Thomas, Catherine hasn't been here. She hasn't helped." "Ruth, that's not fair, Thomas. She's overseas. She sends money." "Thomas, small amounts. Occasionally." Ellen did not move. She lay very still, her hands folded on her stomach, her breathing unchanged. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. They spoke about advance directives, about the living will Ellen had made when Michael died, about whether it needed updating. They spoke about when the time comes as if the time were already scheduled, a future appointment written in a planner. They spoke about splitting the house sale fairly, about listing it in spring when the market improved, about staging it or selling it as is. They spoke about Ellen's pension, which would indeed terminate upon her death, having no survivor benefits since Michael's death had exhausted that option. They spoke about her savings account at the credit union, modest but sufficient, about $12,000 accumulated over years of careful budgeting. They spoke about the small life insurance policy through her former employer, $50,000, barely enough to cover a funeral and settle final expenses. They did not raise their voices. They did not argue. They spoke the way people speak in conference rooms, when a decision has already been made and only the details remain to be assigned and delegated. Ellen watched the light move across the dresser as the sun shifted position, the shadows lengthening. She counted her breaths, in through the nose for 4 counts, out through the mouth for 6 counts. She did not cough. She did not shift position. She did not clear her throat. She waited until she heard them leave, 3 car doors closing in sequence, 3 engines starting, the sound fading down the street. Then she sat up. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, her hands folded in her lap, her feet flat on the floor. The house was silent again. The furnace ticked on. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. Outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. A car drove past, its tires hissing on the cold pavement. Ellen stood. She walked to the kitchen. The chairs were pushed back in place, aligned neatly under the table. The table was clean, wiped down. A folder sat beside the microwave, resting against the wall. It had not been there that morning. Ellen had made toast for breakfast at 7:30, standing in this exact spot, and the counter had been clear. The folder was pale blue, the kind sold in office supply stores in packages of 12. A label on the front read, in Ruth's precise handwriting, "Peace of mind, important information." The letters were formed carefully, each one legible and neat. Ellen opened the folder with steady hands. Inside were blank forms, printed from the internet. A living template from a legal website, complete with signature lines and witness attestations. A durable power of attorney for healthcare form, also blank, with spaces for designating primary and secondary agents. A worksheet for funeral preferences, burial or cremation, service type, music selections, flower preferences, obituary information. There were business cards for 2 funeral homes, one in Dayton called Riverside Memorial Services and one in Kettering called Serenity Funeral Home, 20 minutes away. Both cards had pencil marks in the margins, check marks, question marks, small notes. There was a printout about hospice services with a phone number circled in red pen and the word "call" written beside it. There was a checklist titled, "When a Loved One Passes," 30 days of essential tasks, numbered from 1 to 30, covering everything from obtaining death certificates to canceling subscriptions to notifying Social Security. Ellen read each page slowly, her eyes moving across the text without emotion, absorbing information. She did not touch anything else. She did not rearrange anything. She closed the folder carefully and placed it exactly where she had found it, the edge aligned with the microwave side panel. She walked to the pantry and opened the door. She moved the white ceramic flower canister aside, creating a space behind it. She slid the folder behind the canister, upright and hidden, but accessible if she needed it again. She returned to the back bedroom. She opened the closet and pulled a small cardboard box from the top shelf, pushing aside winter scarves and a hat box to reach it. Inside were old cell phone chargers with connectors that no longer fit any device she owned, instruction manuals for appliances long since discarded, and a baby monitor she had used years ago when Catherine was an infant and Ellen needed to hear her from 2 rooms away. The system was old, analog, operating on a frequency that probably interfered with modern devices. The receiver still worked. She had tested it once years ago when Thomas's daughter was born, thinking she might lend it, but the family had bought a new one with a video screen and smartphone connectivity. Ellen carried the receiver to the bedroom. She plugged it into an outlet near the heating vent, the same vent that had carried voices so clearly that afternoon. She turned the volume dial to 3, low enough not to be obvious, but high enough to hear clearly. She carried the transmitter to the kitchen. She tucked it behind the coffee maker on the counter, angling it toward the table, the small microphone facing outward. The coffee maker was bulky enough to hide it completely. She tested the system that evening. She sat in the bedroom with the receiver on the nightstand and tapped the kitchen counter with her knuckles, 3 sharp raps. The sound came through clearly, slightly distorted but perfectly audible. She adjusted the volume to 4. She tapped again. Perfect. She waited. Sunday afternoon, they returned. Ellen heard the key in the lock at 2:15. She heard voices in the hallway, Ruth saying something about traffic, Thomas responding about parking. Ellen stayed in the bedroom, lying on top of the quilt fully dressed in jeans and a sweater, her breathing steady and deep, mimicking sleep. The receiver sat on the nightstand, the volume at 4, a small green light indicating it was receiving a signal. Thomas's voice, lowered but clear. She's sleeping. We can talk. Ruth's voice, also quiet. Good. I brought the updated forms. The attorney said these are more current than the ones from 2015. Janelle's voice, if she can't make decisions on her own, the transition is smoother. Less conflict. Less room for Catherine to interfere. Ruth's voice, Catherine won't interfere. She's too far away. She doesn't understand the situation. Thomas's voice, we need to update her living will. The current one is too aggressive. Too much intervention. It doesn't reflect reality. Janelle's voice, what if she declines faster than expected? What if there's another infection? Ruth's voice, then we already have consensus among those of us who are here, who are managing her care day to day. Catherine can be informed after decisions are made. Thomas's voice, we're not doing anything wrong. We're being responsible. We're planning ahead. Janelle's voice, exactly. This is what families do. Ellen lay still, her eyes closed, her hands resting on her stomach. She listened. They spoke for 23 minutes. She timed it by the digital clock on the nightstand, watching the numbers change through slitted eyelids. They discussed updating the living will to be more realistic about her prognosis. They discussed naming Thomas as primary healthcare proxy instead of Catherine. They discussed what would happen if Ellen became confused or unable to make rational decisions, their words, spoken as if these states were inevitable, imminent. They discussed the house sale again, agreeing that spring was optimal, that March or April listings attracted the most buyers in this market. They discussed dividing responsibilities. Ruth would handle the funeral arrangements, Thomas would handle the estate, Janelle would manage paperwork and medical communications. When they left, Ellen waited another 10 minutes before getting up. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the receiver, its small green light steady and indifferent. She unplugged it, wrapped the cord neatly around the base, and placed it back in the box in the closet. She walked to the kitchen. She retrieved the folder from behind the flour canister. She opened it on the table and read the pages again, this time with different eyes. This time, she took photographs of each page with her phone, holding it steady, ensuring the entire page was visible in each frame. She saved the photographs in a new folder on her phone labeled Medical Records, a generic enough title not to attract attention if anyone happened to look. She returned the folder to the pantry, placing it exactly as it had been. That night, she did not sleep. She lay awake in the dark and thought about the words she had heard. She thought about the schedule on the refrigerator, about the lamination, about the organization that implied duration, continuity, long-term management. She thought about the living will they wanted to update, the one she had made 8 years earlier when Michael died. The one that clearly stated her wishes for full medical intervention unless she was brain dead or terminally ill with no chance of recovery and significant suffering. She had been specific. She had been clear. She wanted to live. She wanted doctors to try. She thought about the phrase, if she declines, spoken as if her decline were not a possibility but a schedule, something to be anticipated and prepared for, something to be managed rather than resisted. She thought about the phrase consensus, as if her life were a committee decision requiring votes and agreement. She thought about how often the word she had been used, and how few times anyone had said her name. By morning, Ellen had made a decision. She would not confront them. Confrontation would lead to denial, to hurt feelings, to accusations of ingratitude. She would not argue. Arguments could be dismissed as confusion, as emotional fragility, as the irrational response of someone not thinking clearly. She would not appeal to their better judgment or remind them of her competence. Appeals were easily deflected with placating words and false reassurances. She would do what she had always done in her professional life. She would document, verify, and act with precision. She had spent 29 years managing purchase orders, vendor contracts, compliance audits. She knew how systems worked. She knew that control was not seized through force, it was structured through documentation. She knew that power came not from volume but from proof. She knew that the person who controlled the paper trail controlled the outcome. And she knew that people who plan around you believe you will not plan around them. They believe you are passive, compliant, grateful. They believe you don't notice. They believe you won't act. They were wrong. December arrived with cold rain that froze on sidewalks overnight and turned the streets into gray slush by afternoon. The skies remained overcast for days at a time, the sun appearing only briefly in pale yellow glimpses before disappearing again behind thick clouds. Ellen's energy returned incrementally, day by day, her lungs expanding more fully with each breath, her stamina building with each morning walk. She used the nebulizer twice daily as instructed, breathing in the aerosolized albuterol for 5 minutes each session, feeling her airways open. She took her antibiotics on schedule, finishing the full 10-day course even after her symptoms had resolved. She walked to the mailbox each morning, slowly at first, leaning on the porch railing for balance, then with more ease as her strength returned. Her cough faded from persistent to occasional, then disappeared entirely. Her breathing deepened, her chest expanding without the tight resistance that had marked the worst days of her illness. She attended her follow-up appointment with Dr. Patel on Tuesday, December 5th, at 2 in the afternoon. Janelle drove her as scheduled on the laminated chart, arriving 15 minutes early and waiting in the examination room with Ellen, making small talk about holiday shopping and the weather. Dr. Patel was a man in his early 60s, originally from Gujarat, with silver-threaded black hair and a calm, methodical manner that Ellen appreciated. He had been her primary physician for 12 years, since shortly after Michael's death. He listened to her lungs with his stethoscope, the metal cold against her back even through the thin paper gown. He reviewed the chest X-ray that had been taken an hour earlier. He pronounced her recovery excellent, exactly what we want to see. "You're doing everything right," he said, making a note in her chart. Ellen thanked him. She did not mention the folder. She did not mention the conversations. Not yet. The timing wasn't right. She needed more information first. She needed to understand exactly what had been done, what permissions had been assumed, what changes had been made without her knowledge. At home, the casserole rotation continued with clockwork precision. The laminated schedule remained on the refrigerator, updated weekly with new names and tasks printed on fresh paper that Ruth would bring and swap out, removing the old schedule and replacing it with the new one. Ellen followed the schedule without resistance. She allowed Carol, her neighbor from 3 houses down, to sit with her on Wednesday afternoons from 1 until 4, keeping her company while they watched old movies on cable television. Carol was 72, widowed like Ellen, and they had always gotten along pleasantly if not intimately. She allowed Janelle to drive her to her follow-up appointment even though Ellen's own car sat in the driveway, fully functional, recently inspected. She smiled when people asked how she was feeling. She thanked them for their help. She expressed gratitude for the food, for the rides, for the company. And she observed. The mail began arriving pre-sorted. Ellen noticed this on Thursday, December 7th. She retrieved the mail from the box as usual around noon, 3 envelopes, a grocery store flyer, a catalog from a clothing company she had ordered from once, years ago. By the time she returned to the house, climbing the 3 porch steps carefully, Thomas was already inside. His car was in the driveway, parked behind hers. He was standing at the kitchen counter, still wearing his jacket. The door had been locked when she left for the mailbox. He had let himself in with the key he still possessed. "I was just checking on you," he said, his tone casual, friendly. "Wanted to see if you needed anything." Ellen set the mail on the table. Thomas picked it up before she could sort through it herself. He glanced through the envelopes quickly, his eyes scanning return addresses, and set aside the 2 envelopes with transparent windows, one from her bank, a monthly statement, and one from her insurance company. Probably a benefits summary or billing notice. "I'll handle these," he said, placing the envelopes in the inside pocket of his jacket. Ellen looked at him directly. "I can read my own mail." "I know, Mom. I'm just helping. You don't need to worry about bills right now. You should focus on resting. I'm recovered. You're recovering. There's a difference." Ellen did not argue. She noted the date, December 7th. She noted the envelopes, bank and insurance. She noted his reasoning, the way he framed removing her mail as care rather than control. That evening, after Thomas left, Ellen logged into her bank account online, using the desktop computer in the living room that Michael had bought her years ago. She reviewed her recent statements going back 3 months. There were no unauthorized transactions, no withdrawals she hadn't made, no transfers she didn't recognize. But the mailing address for e-statements had been updated. The primary email address was now listed as thomasgarvardman@gmail.com, an address she had never authorized, didn't recognize, had never provided permission to access her account. Ellen took a screenshot, pressing the print screen button and pasting the image into a document she saved to her desktop. She changed the email address back to her own, updating her contact information and verifying the change with a confirmation code sent to her phone. She created a new password for her online banking, something longer and more complex than before, incorporating numbers and symbols. She enabled two-factor authentication, requiring a code sent to her phone before any login could be completed. 2 days later, Saturday morning, her wallet sat differently in her purse. Ellen noticed immediately. She had a system, a particular way of organizing her belongings that had developed over decades. Her wallet always went in the inside zippered pocket, positioned vertically with the fold on the left. That morning, checking before leaving for the grocery store, she found it in the main compartment of her purse, lying flat, horizontal instead of vertical. She had not moved it. She had not used her purse since Thursday, when Janelle had driven her to pick up a prescription. Ellen opened the wallet. Nothing was missing. The cash was still there, 3 $20 bills and a 5. Her credit cards were present. Her debit card was present. But the cards were rearranged. Her driver's license, which she always kept in the front clear slot for easy access when needed, was now in the back slot. Her health insurance card, which she kept behind her license, was in the front. Her credit card was where her grocery rewards card usually sat. Someone had removed the contents of her wallet, examined them, and replaced them incorrectly, not knowing her organizational system, not understanding that she would notice. Ellen sat at the kitchen table. She laid out the cards in the order they should have been, photographing the arrangement with her phone. Then she rearranged them into the wrong order she had found them in and photographed that arrangement as well, documenting the change. She returned them to the correct order and put her wallet back in the proper pocket. She wanted to see if it would happen again. She wanted to know if someone was monitoring her patterns, checking her identification, confirming information. It did not happen immediately. But the following Tuesday, Thomas called in the afternoon. "Do you have your insurance card handy?" he asked, his voice neutral, casual. "Yes." "Why?" "Janelle needs the information for something." "Can you just read me the numbers?" "What does she need it for?" "Some paperwork. Administrative stuff. It's easier if we have all your information centralized." Ellen retrieved her wallet from her purse. She removed her health insurance card. She read him the member identification number, the group number, the phone number printed on the back. Thomas thanked her and said he'd let Janelle know. Ellen hung up. She photographed the insurance card, front and back. She noted the date and time of the call in a small spiral notebook she kept in her desk drawer, the kind with a black cover that Michael had used for tracking household expenses. The vocabulary at the table began to shift, words appearing in conversations that hadn't been part of the family lexicon before. Thomas used words like proxy and executor during casual conversations, mentioning them the way someone might mention weather or traffic, normalized and unremarkable. Ruth mentioned conservatorship one afternoon in early December while folding laundry in Ellen's living room, towels and sheets that Ellen had washed herself and left in the dryer, unfolded. Ruth had taken it upon herself to fold them. "I read an article about conservatorship," Ruth said, smoothing a pillowcase. "They're not as complicated as people think. It's just a legal way to make sure someone's finances are managed properly when they can't do it themselves." Ellen, sitting in the armchair with a book, said nothing. She simply noted the comment, the casualness of it, the way it was presented as general information rather than specific suggestion. Janelle spoke about advanced planning frequently, treating it as if it were a normal topic of discussion over coffee, something everyone did, something responsible people addressed proactively. "My parents did all their advanced planning years ago," she said one morning, sitting at Ellen's kitchen table with a mug of tea. It made everything so much easier. No confusion. No disagreements. Everything written down. Ellen sipped her own tea. What did they plan for? Everything. Living wills. Powers of attorney. Funeral arrangements. Asset distribution. They even prepaid for their plots and headstones. It gave everyone peace of mind. Are your parents ill? Oh no. They're healthy. But they're proactive. That's the point. You plan when you're well, not when there's a crisis. Ellen nodded slowly. That makes sense. She did not say that she had already planned 8 years ago when Michael died. She did not say that her affairs were in order, that her will was clear, that her wishes were documented. She let them believe she was uninformed, unprepared, perhaps a little naive about the practical realities of aging. She listened. She did not correct them. She did not resist. She let them believe she was too tired, too distracted, too grateful for their help to notice the shift happening around her. But she was noticing everything. She was documenting everything. She was creating a record. The folder by the microwave reappeared on December 14th. Ellen had hidden it behind the flour canister, flat and concealed, but one morning when she went to make oatmeal, it was back beside the microwave, propped against the wall exactly as it had been originally. Inside, there were new additions. A sticky note in Ruth's handwriting read, "Her living will needs updating. Current one is from 2015. Doesn't reflect current medical standards." Another note, written in different ink, possibly added later, read, "If she declines cognitively. Do we have consensus on next steps?" A third note listed 3 names with check marks beside 2 of them. Thomas, yes. Ruth, yes. Catherine? The question mark was circled twice, heavily, as if someone had traced over it multiple times. Ellen photographed each note with her phone, holding it steady, ensuring the handwriting was clear and legible in each image. She zoomed in on the specific phrases that troubled her most. Doesn't reflect current medical standards, declines cognitively, consensus. She photographed the checklist about post-loss tasks, the funeral home business cards with their penciled notations, the hospice information sheet with its circled phone number. She returned the folder to the pantry, this time placing it flat beneath a stack of cookbooks on the bottom shelf, wedging it between a Betty Crocker cookbook from the 80s and a slow cooker recipe collection Ruth had given her 3 Christmases ago. It did not reappear on the counter again. But Ellen knew they had noticed it was gone. She knew they were tracking what she touched, what she moved, what she noticed. Her phone began behaving strangely in mid-December. Calls with Catherine, who called every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock Frankfurt time, 2 o'clock Dayton time, started dropping. The first time, on December 17th, Ellen assumed it was a poor connection, a transatlantic delay, some technical issue with the international circuits. The call connected, they spoke for perhaps 30 seconds, Catherine asking how Ellen was feeling, Ellen beginning to answer, and then the line went dead. Silence. Ellen tried calling back. The phone rang, but Catherine didn't answer. 20 minutes later, Catherine called again, apologizing, saying she didn't know what happened. The call just ended on her end too. The second time it happened, on December 24th, Christmas Eve, Ellen checked her phone immediately after the call dropped. She opened the call log. Catherine's number was there, but the duration was listed as 0 seconds, blocked before it could ring, or dropped immediately upon connection. Ellen tested this by calling Catherine herself, using the callback feature. The call went through normally. They spoke for 15 minutes about Catherine's plans for Christmas, about the Christmas markets in Frankfurt that were closing for the holiday, about whether it might snow. But the next Sunday, December 31st, New Year's Eve, the same thing happened again. Catherine's incoming call dropped before Ellen could answer. Ellen checked her phone settings, navigating through the menus carefully, reading each option. She found something she hadn't noticed before. A number had been added to her block list. Catherine's number. Someone had accessed her phone and blocked Catherine's calls. Ellen removed the number from the block list. She changed her phone's passcode, choosing something new, something no one could guess, by watching her thumb movements. She enabled additional security settings, requiring the passcode every time the phone screen turned on rather than allowing face recognition or fingerprint access. That evening, Catherine called again at her usual time. The phone rang normally. Ellen answered. They spoke for 20 minutes about the turn of the year, about resolutions neither of them believed in making, about the weather in Germany and Ohio. Before they hung up, Ellen said carefully, "If you call and I don't answer, try again immediately. If it happens twice, send me a text message." Catherine paused. Ellen could hear her breathing across the 4,000 miles between them. "Is something wrong, Mom?" "No," Ellen said. "Just different. I'll explain later." "Should I be worried?" "No. Just aware." "All right. I'll call twice if needed." After they hung up, Ellen sat with the phone in her hands for a long time. She thought about the blocked number. She thought about who had access to her phone. She usually left it charging on the kitchen counter overnight. Anyone with the old passcode, which she had never changed, which had been 1234 for years because it was easy to remember, could have picked it up, accessed her settings, made changes. The router password had been changed sometime in the third week of December. Ellen discovered this on December 21st when she tried to connect her laptop one evening to check her email. She had been using the laptop more frequently since the pneumonia, staying connected, monitoring her accounts, researching medical information about recovery timelines and lung health. The password she had used for 3 years no longer worked. The network appeared in the list of available connections, her home network with its familiar name, Carver Home, but the password field rejected her entry 3 times before locking her out temporarily. Ellen unplugged the router from the wall outlet, waited 30 seconds, and plugged it back in, the standard reset procedure Michael had taught her years ago. When it restarted, she tried again. Still locked out. She walked to where the router sat on a shelf in the hallway, a small black box with blinking green lights, and examined it closely. A sticker had been placed on the side panel, a white label with neat handwriting in blue ink, new password, Carver Home 2023. The handwriting was Thomas's, his particular way of forming capital letters, the double exclamation points his habitual punctuation. Ellen wrote down the password. She logged into the router's admin interface using her laptop, typing the IP address into the browser bar 192.168.1.1, the standard gateway for most home routers. The username was still admin. The password was the new one from the sticker. She gained access. She checked the settings. The administrator email had been changed from her email address to thomascarverdman@gmail.com, the same address he had used for her bank account e-statements. Ellen took screenshots of every settings page, the administrator email, the password settings, the connected devices, the access logs showing when changes had been made. December 18th at 3:47 in the afternoon. A Wednesday. Ellen had been at the library for a book club. Thomas had been here, in her home, accessing her router. She changed the administrator email back to her own. She changed the Wi-Fi password to something only she would know, a combination of her mother's maiden name and Michael's birth year, no pattern anyone could guess. She removed the sticker from the router and threw it in the trash outside, under coffee grounds and used tea bags. The next day, Thursday, December 22nd, Thomas called. "Is your internet working?" His voice was neutral, inquiring, the tone of someone troubleshooting a technical problem. "Yes," Ellen said. "Why?" "Just checking. I thought there might be an outage in your area. My phone wasn't connecting when I was nearby yesterday. It's working fine." "Good. Let me know if you have any problems." Ellen assured him she would. She hung up and made a note in her spiral notebook. December 22, Thomas asked about the internet, confirmed he was in the house yesterday without my knowledge. Her drinking glass began appearing on the counter each morning, a pattern that started around December 10th and continued for 2 weeks. Ellen would wake, come to the kitchen, and find a tall glass filled with water, a reusable silicone straw inserted, positioned beside the coffee maker. She had not placed it there. She had not filled it. But each morning it waited. The straw had a crack near the top, a small split in the silicone that Ellen could feel with her tongue when she drank, a rough edge that caught slightly. She examined the straw closely under the overhead light. The crack was perhaps 2 millimeters long, barely visible but definitely present. She threw the straw away, dropping it in the trash bag under the sink. The next morning, December 11th, a new glass appeared with water and a different straw, identical in color and style, but not cracked. Ellen used it, drinking half the glass before making her coffee. By noon, when she returned to the kitchen after her morning walk, the same cracked straw was back, washed and inserted into a fresh glass of water. Someone had retrieved it from the trash. Ellen removed the straw again. This time, she threw it in the outside trash can, the large green bin at the side of the house, burying it beneath newspapers and cardboard. The following morning, December 12th, a different straw appeared in her glass, identical in color and style, also with a crack near the top, in almost the same location. Ellen did not use the glass. She filled her own glass from a different cupboard, used a metal straw from the drawer, and left the pre-filled glass sitting on the counter untouched. By evening, when Thomas stopped by after work, the glass was gone, washed and put away, the straw removed. The pattern did not repeat after that. But Ellen understood the message. It was not about the straw. It was not about the water. It was about establishing routine, about creating patterns that positioned her as passive, as cared for, as someone who required preparation and service. It was about control that looked like kindness. In mid-December, Ellen attended her book club at the library for the first time since her illness. It was the second Tuesday of the month, December 12th, and they were discussing a novel about a woman who disappeared from a cruise ship under suspicious circumstances. Ellen had read the book twice during her recovery, lying in bed with the pages propped against her knees, and she had thoughts about the ending, about ambiguity and closure, and how sometimes the absence of resolution was the point. Ruth offered to drive her. Ellen declined politely, saying she wanted to drive herself, that she needed to regain her confidence behind the wheel, that her doctor had cleared her for normal activities. Ruth insisted, saying the roads might be icy, that evening driving was risky, that it would be no trouble at all. Ellen insisted more firmly, her voice pleasant but unyielding. "I appreciate it, Ruth. I'll be fine." Ruth relented but called twice during the tower meeting, her name appearing on Ellen's phone screen at 7:30 and again at 8:45. Ellen silenced the calls, letting them go to voicemail. She checked the messages afterward, standing in the library parking lot, the cold December air sharp in her lungs. Both messages were brief. "Just checking in, call me when you can, no emergency. No crisis. Just monitoring." At the book club meeting, Ellen sat with 5 other women, all between 52 and 74 years old, women she had known casually for years through these monthly gatherings. They discussed the novel, its themes of abandonment and agency, the question of whether the woman who disappeared had jumped, fallen, or been pushed. During the conversation, one of the women, Margaret, retired teacher with short gray hair and bifocals, mentioned her own mother, who had recently been moved into assisted living. "We had to make the decision without really consulting her," Margaret said, her voice carrying both guilt and justification. "She was resistant at first, kept saying she was fine in her own home, but my siblings and I knew she wasn't safe anymore. Too many falls. Too much confusion. After 3 weeks in the facility, she settled in. She's accepting it now. It was for her own good." The other women nodded sympathetically. Someone mentioned that transitions were always hard. Someone else said that sometimes families had to make difficult decisions, that love meant doing what was right even when it wasn't easy. Ellen listened. She did not share her own story. She did not mention the folder or the schedule or the conversations she had overheard. She simply listened and thought about the phrase "for her own good," how it was used to justify actions taken without consent, how it positioned resistance as confusion rather than autonomy. She thought about the phrase "she's accepting it now," how acceptance could be confused with resignation, and how giving up was often called peace. When the meeting ended, Ellen drove home carefully, obeying all traffic laws, signaling every turn, her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. She pulled into her driveway at 9:15. The porch light was on, illuminating the 3 steps up to the door. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was as she had left it. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been taken. But she felt the difference now, the awareness that privacy was provisional, that boundaries existed only as long as no one chose to cross them. That night, Ellen could not sleep. She lay in bed and watched the ceiling, the shadows cast by the streetlight outside shifting as branches moved in the wind. She thought about the living will they wanted to update. She thought about the schedule on the refrigerator, its laminated permanence suggesting months of coordination ahead. She thought about the conversations she had overheard, the casual planning, the administrative tone. She thought about the word consensus and how it implied democracy, but actually meant a predetermined outcome. She thought about how they had started small, a key, a schedule, a casserole, and how each small thing had built into a structure that enclosed her, limited her, prepared for her incapacity before her incapacity existed. At 2 in the morning, she got up. She walked to the kitchen in her nightgown and robe and boiled water for tea, using the electric kettle, waiting for the click that signaled readiness. She sat at the table in the dark, the only light coming from the small bulb above the stove, and drank her tea slowly, holding the mug between both palms, feeling the warmth. She thought about what she knew and what she could prove. She knew they were planning. She could prove they had accessed her mail, her wallet, her phone, her router. She knew they were preparing for a future in which she could not make decisions. She could prove they had discussed it, documented it, and begun executing steps. But knowing and proving were not enough. Knowledge without action was just information. Proof without presentation was just files on a phone. She needed to act. And action required structure, planning, documentation that could not be dismissed or explained away. Ellen finished her tea. She rinsed the mug and placed it in the dish drainer. She returned to bed. She did not sleep, but she had the beginning of a plan, the first outline of steps that needed to be taken in sequence, carefully, verifiably. The next morning, December 13th, Ellen began. The first week of January brought snow, heavy, wet, and relentless, the kind that fell in thick flakes and accumulated quickly, muffling sound and transforming the familiar landscape into something temporarily foreign. Ellen Street was plowed twice by the city crews, but remained slick between treatments, the pavement invisible beneath packed snow that turned to ice overnight. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind came from the north, steady and cutting. Thomas called each morning between 8:30 and 9 to ask if she needed anything. Groceries. Medication. Shoveling. Ellen said no to everything. She had stocked her pantry in December. Her prescriptions were filled through the end of January. She had shoveled her own walk on the 3rd of January, working slowly and carefully, taking breaks, feeling her muscles remember the movement. She did not mention that she had driven herself to the post office on Tuesday, January 2nd, the day after New Year's, to mail a request for her credit report. She had done this the old way, the way Michael had taught her years ago when identity theft was becoming common and monitoring was advisable. She had downloaded a form from the Federal Trade Commission's website, printed it on her home printer, filled it out by hand using a blue ballpoint pen, signed and dated it. She did not use the online portal. She did not want a digital trail that could be tracked through her internet provider, that could leave cookies or browsing history. She addressed the envelope by hand, carefully printing the credit bureau's address. She placed a first-class stamp in the corner. She drove to the post office on South Dixie Drive, parked in the small lot, and dropped it in the blue mailbox outside the entrance. 2 weeks later, on January 16th, the report arrived in a large envelope marked Official Credit Report. Do not discard. Ellen opened it at the kitchen table, spreading the pages flat. The report was 12 pages long, dense with information, her name, her address, her date of birth, her social security number partially redacted, her credit history going back 7 years. She read each page carefully, tracing the lines with her index finger to maintain her place. On page 7, in the section titled Credit Inquiries, 3 items were flagged in bold text. The first inquiry was from a company called Lifeguard Systems, dated December 14, 2023. Ellen had not contacted this company. She had not requested any information about medical alert devices or monitoring services. The second inquiry was from a business called Serenity Preneed Planning, dated December 18, 2023. Ellen had not consulted with any funeral service providers. She had not signed any preneed contracts or requested consultations. The third inquiry was from a branch of her credit union, dated December 22, 2023. Ellen had not visited this branch. She banked primarily online or at the ATM near the grocery store. She had not applied for any loans, credit cards, or new accounts. Ellen laid the report flat on the table. She photographed each page with her phone, holding it steady above the paper, ensuring every line was legible in the image. She photographed page 7 twice, zooming in on the 3 flagged inquiries. She called the medical alert company first, using the phone number listed on the credit inquiry section. She was transferred twice, first to customer service and then to account verification. The representative who finally accessed her file was a woman with a slight Southern accent who identified herself as Melissa. "I'm calling about a credit inquiry dated December 14th, Ellen said, her voice calm and factual. "I did not authorize this inquiry." Melissa typed on her keyboard, the sound audible through the phone. "I show that inquiry was made on behalf of a family member who contacted us regarding services for you. Do you have a name?" "I'm sorry, I can't disclose that information without authorization. Privacy regulations." "I'm the person in question. The inquiry is on my credit report. You're reporting my information to credit bureaus without my consent. The inquiry was made by someone who represented themselves as acting on your behalf. Did they provide documentation? A power of attorney? Any legal authorization?" Melissa paused. "I don't have access to that level of detail. You would need to speak with our compliance department." Ellen requested the compliance department phone number. Melissa provided it. Ellen thanked her and hung up. She made a note in her spiral notebook, December 14th inquiry made by family member, no verification of authority, name not provided. She called the pre-need planning service next, using the number from the inquiry. A man answered, identifying himself as Richard Kowalski, planning specialist. Ellen explained the unauthorized inquiry. Richard pulled up the file. "I show that a consultation was requested on December 18th by a family member on your behalf," Richard said. "The consultation was not completed, but the inquiry was recorded as part of our intake process." "Who made the request?" "I don't have that information in front of me. It would be in the initial contact notes, but I'd need to access archived files." "Was any payment made?" "No. It was just an inquiry. Information gathering." "Did the person provide my social security number?" "They would have needed to provide that to initiate the credit inquiry, yes." Ellen's hand tightened on the phone. "So someone provided my social security number to your company without my knowledge or consent." That would need to be addressed with our compliance office. "I can transfer you." "Please." She was transferred to voicemail. She left a message with her name, phone number, and a brief statement. "I did not authorize anyone to access my social security number or credit history on my behalf. Please call me to discuss this matter." She noted the call in her notebook. She called her credit union last, asking to speak with the branch manager at the location listed on the inquiry, the Kettering branch on Far Hills Avenue, a location she had never visited. She was connected to a woman named Patricia Gaines, whose voice was professional and measured. "I'm calling about a credit inquiry made at your branch on December 22nd, Ellen said. "I was not at your branch on that date. I did not authorize this inquiry." Patricia typed on her computer, the soft clicking sound carrying through the line. "I see the inquiry. It was made by your son, Thomas Carver. He presented identification and indicated he was helping manage your accounts." Ellen's stomach tightened. "He is not authorized to manage my accounts. He is not listed on my accounts. He does not have power of attorney." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I see. He represented himself as helping you with financial planning and requested information about your account balances and beneficiaries. What information did you provide? We provided general information about your checking and savings balances. We confirmed that you had no outstanding loans or credit obligations. We provided information about whether beneficiaries were designated on your accounts. Did he attempt to make any changes? No. We explained that changes require the account holder to be present with valid identification. Ellen took a slow breath. I would like to add a security flag to my accounts. Any future inquiries should require verbal verification with a password only I know. I can do that immediately. Are you able to come to a branch in person to set the password? Yes. Tomorrow morning. I'll make a note. When you arrive, ask for me specifically. We'll set up the security protocol. Thank you. Ellen hung up. She sat very still, her hands flat on the table on either side of the credit report. She stared at the pages, at the 3 flagged inquiries, at the documented evidence that multiple someones, had been accessing her private information using her social security number, initiating credit checks, gathering financial data, planning around her without her knowledge. She stood. She walked to the small desk in the living room and opened the bottom drawer. She removed a manila folder, the kind with a metal clasp and a tab for labeling. She wrote Documentation, January 2024 on the tab in neat block letters. She placed the credit report inside. She placed the printed screenshots from her phone, the bank email changes, the patient portal changes, the router settings inside. She closed the folder and placed it in the drawer beneath a stack of old tax returns. That afternoon, Ellen drove to the credit union despite the snow-packed roads. She arrived at 2:30. Patricia Gaines met her in a small office near the back of the branch, a room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window that overlooked the parking lot. Ellen provided her identification. Patricia verified her account information. Together, they established a verbal security password, a word that would be required before any information could be accessed by phone or before any in-person inquiries could be processed. Ellen chose her mother's middle name, Josephine. A name Thomas would not know, would not guess. Patricia entered it into the system, setting flags on both Ellen's checking and savings accounts. Any future requests for information will require this password, Patricia said. We'll ask security questions first, then require the verbal password. If someone cannot provide it, we will contact you directly before proceeding. What about online access? Your online banking requires your username and password. If those are compromised, contact us immediately and we'll freeze the accounts. Ellen thanked her. She left the credit union at 3:15, driving home slowly on roads that had been salted but remained slick in patches. She felt something shift inside her chest, not relief exactly, but the beginning of it. The first boundary was re-established. That evening, she logged into her patient portal, the online system her healthcare provider used for scheduling, communications, and medical records. She reviewed her profile information, clicking through each section methodically: personal information, contact information, insurance information, advance directives, emergency contacts. Her emergency contact list had been updated since she last checked in November. Previously, her primary contact had been Catherine, with her phone number in Frankfurt, her email address, and a note indicating she was out of the country, but accessible by phone. Thomas had been listed as secondary and Ruth as tertiary. Now, Thomas was listed as primary. Ruth was listed as secondary. Catherine had been removed entirely. Ellen checked the audit log at the bottom of the page, a feature she had not known existed until she explored the interface thoroughly. The change had been made on December 9th at 2:14 in the afternoon. Ellen opened her calendar, a paper planner she kept on the kitchen counter. December 9th had been a Wednesday. She had taken her afternoon cough medicine, a prescription syrup with codeine that made her drowsy, at 1:30. She had dozed on the couch from approximately 1:45 until nearly 4. Someone had been in her home during that window. Someone had accessed her patient portal using her laptop, which she usually left open on the desk, logged in for convenience. Ellen took screenshots of the emergency contact page showing Thomas as primary and Catherine removed. She took screenshots of the audit log showing the date and time of the change. She printed both screenshots using her home printer, the old inkjet that took a full minute to warm up before printing each page. She changed her patient portal password immediately, creating a new password that incorporated her wedding anniversary and her father's middle initial. She enabled two-factor authentication, requiring a code sent to her phone before any login. She restored Catherine as her primary emergency contact, removing Ruth entirely and demoting Thomas to secondary. She saved the changes and logged out. She added the printed screenshots to the manila folder in the desk drawer. The folder was beginning to accumulate weight, physical and evidential. She now had documentation of unauthorized credit inquiries, email address changes on her financial accounts, emergency contact changes on her medical portal, router password changes in her home. She had dates. She had times. She had names in some cases, patterns in others. But documentation alone was not protection. She needed to prevent future changes. She needed to lock down her medical and financial systems so that any attempt to override her wishes would require defeating multiple layers of verification. She needed to create a legal structure that made her the sole authority, explicitly and inarguably. On Friday, January 19th, Ellen called her primary physician's office. The receptionist answered. A young woman Ellen had spoken with dozens of times over the years. Ellen asked to schedule an appointment with Dr. Patel, explaining that she needed to discuss her advance directive and request updated documentation. "Is this an urgent medical issue?" the receptionist asked. "No, but I would like to schedule it soon. We have an opening next Thursday, January 25th at 10 in the morning. I'll take it." The receptionist confirmed the appointment. Ellen hung up and made a note in her planner. January 25, 10 a.m., Dr. Patel, Advance Directive and Capacity Documentation. That same afternoon, Ellen called the hospital where she had been treated for pneumonia. She asked to speak with the social work department. She was transferred to a voicemail system. She left a message. "This is Ellen Carver. I was a patient in November 2023. I would like to speak with a social worker about protecting my medical decision-making rights. Please call me at your earliest convenience." She left her phone number and hung up. On Monday, January 22nd, a woman called back. She identified herself as Marla Nguyen, a hospital social worker. Her voice was calm, professional, warm without being overly familiar. "I received your message," Marla said. "You mentioned protecting your medical decision-making rights. Can you tell me more about your concerns?" Ellen had prepared for this call. She had written notes, key points she wanted to cover, phrases that were factual without being accusatory. She spoke for 15 minutes, explaining the pneumonia, the recovery, the conversations she had overheard, the documents that had been prepared without her involvement, the changes made to her patient portal, the credit inquiries, the pattern of actions suggesting anticipatory control. "I am not incapacitated," Ellen said clearly. "I am fully competent. I make my own decisions. But I am concerned that family members are positioning themselves to override my wishes if I experience another health crisis. I want my medical chart to reflect my competence and my requirement that only I can authorize changes to my healthcare proxy or advance directive." Marla listened without interrupting. When Ellen finished, Marla said, "What you're describing is a pattern we see occasionally. Family members begin planning with good intentions, but the planning can become controlling if the patient is not centered in the process. We can add a protective flag to your chart." "What does that involve?" "We add an alert that requires anyone requesting access to your medical information or attempting to update your healthcare proxy to verify your identity in person with photo identification and to complete a capacity assessment before any changes are processed. It prevents someone from calling in or submitting paperwork on your behalf without your direct involvement." "How long does it take to implement?" "I can add it today. It will be active in the system within 1 hour." "Please do that." "I will. I'll also document our conversation in your chart, noting that you have expressed concerns about potential interference with your medical autonomy and that you are competent and wish to make your own decisions." Ellen felt her shoulders relax slightly. Thank you. I'll call you back within 2 hours to confirm it's done. Marla called back at 3:45 that afternoon. The flag is active, she said. Your chart now has a red banner that appears whenever anyone accesses it. The banner reads, Alert, patient makes own decisions. Verify identity with photo ID. Do not accept proxy changes without documented capacity evaluation. Anyone from admissions to emergency to specialists will see this immediately. Ellen thanked her. She added a note to her spiral notebook, January 22, protective flag added to hospital chart, red banner active. That evening, Ellen searched online for elder law attorneys in the Dayton area. She used the Montgomery County Bar Association's website, filtering by practice area. She found 3 attorneys who specialized in elder law, estate planning, and advanced directives. She read their biographies, their client reviews, their areas of expertise. She chose one, Leonard Jacobs, 62 years old, practicing for 34 years, located above a flooring showroom on the east side of Dayton. She called his office the next morning, Tuesday, January 23rd. A receptionist answered. Ellen explained briefly that she needed help updating her estate plan and protecting her medical decision-making authority. The receptionist scheduled an appointment for Thursday, January 25th at 10 in the morning. Ellen paused. I have a medical appointment at that time. We have availability at 2 in the afternoon. I'll take it. The receptionist confirmed. Ellen added it to her planner. January 25, 2 p.m., Attorney Leonard Jacobs, Estate Planning and Medical Authority Protection. The pieces were moving into place. She had secured her financial accounts with verbal passwords. She had secured her medical chart with a protective flag. Now she needed to secure her legal documents, updating them to reflect her current wishes explicitly and revoke any ambiguity that could be exploited. On Thursday, January 25th, Ellen woke at 6 in the morning. She dressed carefully, dark slacks, a cream sweater, her good leather boots. She ate breakfast slowly, oatmeal with brown sugar and walnuts, black coffee. She reviewed her notes, the spiral notebook she had been maintaining, the manila folder with its growing collection of documentation. At 9:30, she drove to Dr. Patel's office for her 10 o'clock appointment. The roads were clear, the worst of the January snow having melted over the weekend. The sky was overcast but bright, the sun diffused behind thin clouds. Dr. Patel called her back at 10:15. They sat in the examination room, Ellen on the paper-covered table, Dr. Patel on the rolling stool. She explained what she needed, a formal assessment of her cognitive capacity and a letter confirming that she was fully competent to make her own medical decisions. Has someone questioned your capacity? Dr. Patel asked, his tone concerned. Not directly. But preparations are being made that assume my future incapacity. I want to establish now, while I am unquestionably confident, that I am making my own decisions. Dr. Patel nodded. He conducted a mini mental state examination, asking her questions to assess memory, orientation, attention, and language. What is today's date? January 25th, 2024. What season is it? Winter. Where are we right now? The Cedar Ridge Medical Center in Kettering, Ohio. Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? 100, 93, 86, 79, 72. Can you repeat these 3 words and remember them? Apple, table, penny. He continued for 15 minutes, testing various cognitive functions. Ellen answered every question correctly without hesitation. Dr. Patel made notes in her chart. Your cognitive function is entirely normal. You are fully competent and capable of making independent medical decisions. Will you write a letter stating that? Yes. I'll have it ready by Monday. It will state that I have examined you, assessed your capacity using standardized measures, and determined that you possess the mental capacity to make informed decisions about your medical care. I'd also like you to note in my chart that any future changes to my advanced directives or healthcare proxy must be initiated by me in person, with a capacity assessment conducted at the time of the change. Dr. Patel typed on his computer. I'm adding that note now. Patient requests that all advance directive and proxy changes be initiated only by a patient in person with contemporaneous capacity assessment. Is that accurate? Yes. Done. Ellen thanked him. She left the office at 10:50, drove to a quiet diner she liked on Wilmington Pike, and ordered a bowl of soup and a cup of coffee. She ate slowly, watching the parking lot through the window, thinking about the afternoon appointment ahead. At 1:45, she drove to Leonard Jacobs' office. The building was narrow, brick, exactly as it had appeared in the online photographs. A sign in the first-floor window read, "Jacobs and Associates, Elder Law, Estate Planning, Advanced Directives." Ellen climbed the stairs to the second floor, her hand on the railing, each step deliberate. The office smelled like coffee and old carpet and copy machine toner. A receptionist, a woman in her 40s with short black hair and colorful glasses, greeted her and asked her to wait. Ellen sat in a chair against the wall and folded her hands in her lap. The waiting room was small, with 4 chairs and a table stacked with magazines about retirement and financial planning. Leonard Jacobs appeared after 5 minutes, a man in his early 60s with gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a navy cardigan over a white dress shirt. He shook Ellen's hand, his grip firm and brief, and led her to a small conference room with a table, 4 chairs, and a window that overlooked the parking lot. Ellen sat. She placed her purse on the floor beside her chair. She folded her hands on the table. "Tell me what brings you here," Leonard said, sitting across from her with a yellow legal pad and a pen. Ellen told him. She spoke for 30 minutes without interruption, beginning with the pneumonia in November and proceeding chronologically through January. She explained the casserole schedule, the missing key, the laminated organization, the overheard conversations, the folder by the microwave, the credit inquiries, the email address changes, the patient portal modifications, the router password, the blocked phone calls, the wallet rearrangement. She cited dates. She provided details. She spoke in the calm, factual manner she had developed over 29 years of presenting purchase order discrepancies to management. She recited facts without embellishment, letting the pattern speak for itself. Leonard took notes, his pen moving steadily across the legal pad. When Ellen finished, he set down his pen and looked at her directly. "Are you currently under any medical care that affects your cognitive function?" "No. I saw Dr. Patel this morning. He conducted a capacity assessment. I passed without difficulty. Do you have any diagnosis of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or significant memory impairment?" "No." "Do you feel coerced, threatened, or unsafe in your home?" "No. I feel managed. I feel prepared for. But I do not feel unsafe." Leonard nodded slowly. "What you're describing is anticipatory control. It occurs when family members begin planning around an aging or recently ill relative with the stated intention of being helpful, but the actual effect of removing autonomy incrementally. It often begins with good intentions that become self-serving, either financially or psychologically, as the family members begin to see themselves as responsible for the person rather than supportive of the person. Can it be stopped? Yes. Through documentation, legal structure, and clear communication. You've already begun the documentation process. You have evidence of unauthorized access to your financial and medical information. You've already begun securing those systems. Now we need to create legal structures that explicitly establish you as the sole decision-maker and remove ambiguity about who has authority to act on your behalf. What do you recommend?" Leonard flipped to a fresh page on his legal pad and began writing as he spoke. "First, we confirm your capacity formally. I'll draft a letter to your physician requesting a copy of the assessment he conducted this morning. That letter will be part of your permanent file. Second, we draft a new advanced directive. Your current one from 2015 is still valid, but we'll create an updated version that explicitly revokes all prior versions and states your medical wishes clearly and unambiguously. Third, we review your current will and powers of attorney. If you currently name your son or sister as agents for healthcare or financial decisions, we'll consider changing those designations. Fourth, we establish a revocable living trust and transfer your primary assets into it, your home, your bank accounts, your investment accounts. This protects those assets and ensures they're distributed according to your wishes, not subject to family negotiation. Fifth, we implement HIPAA restrictions. You'll designate specifically who can access your medical information and under what circumstances. Ellen listened, her hands still folded on the table. How long will this take? 2 weeks to draft and finalize the trust documents. 1 week for the medical documents. We can begin today. Then let's begin. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents and discussing options. Leonard explained each legal instrument in plain language, avoiding jargon when possible, defining terms when necessary. He explained revocable trusts and how they differed from wills. He explained durable powers of attorney and healthcare proxies. He explained HIPAA authorization forms and how specific the restrictions could be. He asked Ellen about her current will. She explained that it had been drafted 8 years earlier when Michael died, naming Thomas and Catherine as equal beneficiaries, Ruth as alternate executor if both children were unable to serve. Standard provisions. Who is currently named as your healthcare proxy? Leonard asked. Catherine, my daughter. She lives in Germany. Thomas is secondary. Ruth is tertiary. Do you want to change that? I want Catherine to remain primary. But I want to remove Ruth entirely. And I want to add a requirement that Thomas can only act if Catherine is unreachable and only with documented medical consultation. Leonard made notes. We can structure it that way. We can also name an independent fiduciary, a professional trustee or healthcare advocate, as an additional layer. Someone with no family connection who can provide objective assessment. Ellen considered this. Yes, let's do that. They discussed financial powers of attorney. Ellen's current document, also from 8 years earlier, named Thomas as her financial agent if she became incapacitated. Leonard suggested revoking that immediately and either naming Catherine or using an independent professional fiduciary. I want an independent fiduciary, Ellen said. I don't want family members with access to my finances. I can recommend several. They're licensed, bonded, and regulated. They charge fees, usually a percentage of assets managed, but they provide accountability and documentation. That's acceptable. They discussed the advance directive. Ellen's current version stated that she wished to receive all appropriate medical interventions unless she was irreversibly brain dead or suffering from a terminal illness with no possibility of recovery. She had been specific when it was drafted. She had used clear language. But Leonard suggested making it even more explicit. We can add language that specifically defines what you mean by appropriate medical interventions, he said. We can state that you wish to receive treatment for potentially reversible conditions, including infections, respiratory complications, cardiac events. We can state that you wish to be consulted about treatment decisions whenever you are able to communicate, even if communication is limited. We can state that you do not wish your life prolonged artificially if you are in a persistent vegetative state or suffering from end-stage terminal illness with documented medical consensus that recovery is not possible. Yes, all of that. They discussed HIPAA authorizations. Leonard explained that Ellen could designate exactly who could access her medical information and what type of information they could access. She could allow access to general health status without allowing access to specific diagnoses or treatment details. She could require her written consent for each disclosure or allow standing authorization. I want Catherine to have full access without my consent, Ellen said. Everyone else requires my written, dated consent for each disclosure. We can do that. By the end of the meeting, they had outlined a plan. Leonard would prepare a letter to Dr. Patel requesting capacity assessment documentation. A new advance directive explicitly revoking all prior versions. Updated durable power of attorney for healthcare naming Catherine as primary, and independent fiduciary as secondary, with specific restrictions on Thomas. Updated durable power of attorney for finances naming an independent fiduciary as agent. A revocable living trust transferring her home, bank accounts, and investment accounts into trust. HIPAA authorization forms limiting disclosures to Catherine only, with all others requiring written consent. Leonard estimated the work would take 10 business days to complete. The cost would be $3,500, payable half upfront and half upon completion. Ellen wrote a check from her personal checking account for $1,750. Leonard provided her with a receipt and a folder of information about living trusts, advance directives, and fiduciary services. Ellen left the office at 4:30, carrying the folder, feeling the weight of what she had set in motion. She drove home slowly, stopping at a red light on Main Street and watching people cross in the fading January light, a young woman with a stroller, an elderly man with a cane, a couple holding hands. Ordinary lives, ordinary afternoons. She arrived home at 5. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was quiet. She hung her coat in the closet. She placed the folder on her desk. She sat on the couch and simply breathed, in and out, letting the tension in her shoulders release gradually. She had taken the first steps. She had documented the pattern. She had secured her systems. She had engaged professionals. She had begun building the structure that would protect her autonomy. But she had not told anyone what she was doing. Thomas and Ruth and Janelle continued to believe she was recovering quietly, gratefully accepting their help, unaware of their planning, incapable of strategic response. They were wrong about all of it. And Ellen was not finished. February arrived with brittle cold and clear skies, the kind of winter weather that turned breath visible and made car doors stick when frozen overnight. The temperature stayed below freezing for the first 2 weeks, climbing briefly into the high 30s only on afternoons when the sun appeared. Ellen's routines had solidified into patterns that felt sustainable, even comfortable. She walked 2 miles each morning, a loop around her neighborhood that took her past the elementary school where she had volunteered when Catherine was young, past the small park with rusted swings that no one used in winter, past the row of bungalows that looked exactly like hers, built in the same year from the same plans. She walked without hurry, her breath pluming white in the cold air, her stride steady and deliberate. She felt strong. She felt oriented. She felt like herself again. The casserole rotation had tapered off by February. The laminated schedule was still on the refrigerator, but the entries had become less frequent, Ruth checking in twice a week instead of daily, Thomas stopping by Sundays instead of every evening. They believed she had stabilized, that the crisis had passed, that the intensive management phase could be relaxed into maintenance mode. Ellen did not correct this assumption. She smiled when they visited. She thanked them for their concern. She reported that she was feeling well, that her energy had returned, that she was managing fine on her own. On February 5th, Leonard Jacobs called. "The documents are ready for your review," he said. "Can you come to the office?" Ellen scheduled an appointment for the next day, Tuesday, February 6th, at 2 in the afternoon. She arrived 15 minutes early. Leonard met her in the same conference room where they had first talked. A stack of papers sat on the table, neatly organized in separate folders labeled with tabs. They spent 2 hours reviewing each document page by page. Leonard explained the language, the legal implications, the procedures for updating or revoking. Ellen read carefully, asking questions when terminology was unclear, requesting clarification when procedures seemed ambiguous. The advance directive was 8 pages long, far more detailed than her previous version. It specified that Ellen wished to receive all medically appropriate treatments for conditions with reasonable likelihood of recovery. It defined reasonable likelihood as greater than 20% probability based on documented medical literature and consultation with at least 2 independent physicians. It specified that she wished to be consulted about treatment decisions whenever she retained any ability to communicate, even if that communication was limited to yes/no responses through blinking or hand squeezing. It specified that she did not wish to receive artificial nutrition or hydration if she was in a persistent vegetative state with no reasonable likelihood of regaining consciousness, as determined by neurological evaluation and confirmed by 2 independent neurologists. It specified that persistent vegetative state meant a condition lasting longer than 6 months with documented absence of higher brain function on repeated imaging studies. The document was precise, clinical, and unambiguous. It left little room for interpretation or family negotiation. Ellen signed it in the presence of Leonard and his receptionist, who served as witnesses. Both signed attestations confirming that Ellen appeared to be of sound mind and acting voluntarily. Leonard notarized all 3 signatures with his official seal, embossing the paper and signing his name. The durable power of attorney for healthcare named Catherine as primary agent. If Catherine was unavailable, defined as unreachable for 48 consecutive hours despite documented attempts to contact her through multiple methods, then a professional healthcare advocate from an organization called Midwest Patient Advocacy Services would serve as secondary agent. Thomas was removed entirely. Ruth was removed entirely. The document explicitly stated, "I revoke all prior healthcare powers of attorney and specifically exclude the following individuals from serving as my healthcare agent under any circumstances: Thomas Michael Carver, Ruth Diane Merrill." The language was harsh, final. Ellen hesitated only briefly before signing. She thought about Thomas, about the years of childhood birthday parties and school concerts, and the way he had held her hand at Michael's funeral. She thought about Ruth, her older sister by 2 years, who had taught her to ride a bicycle and helped her move into her first apartment. But she thought more about the conversations she had overheard, about the words arrangements and split fairly and consensus, about how quickly love had become logistics. She signed. The durable power of attorney for finances named Midwest Financial Fiduciary Services as her agent if she became incapacitated. Defined as unable to manage financial affairs due to documented physical or mental impairment confirmed by 2 independent physicians. The agent's authority would be limited and documented, requiring detailed monthly accountings to Ellen and Catherine, with all major decisions requiring approval from both unless Ellen was completely incapacitated. The document explicitly revoked Thomas's previous designation and excluded both Thomas and Ruth from any financial authority. Ellen signed. The Revocable Living Trust was 23 pages long, dense with legal language about trustees and beneficiaries and distribution provisions. Leonard explained it in sections. The trust named Ellen as the initial trustee, giving her complete control over the assets during her lifetime. Upon her incapacity or death, Midwest Financial Fiduciary Services would serve as successor trustee, managing and distributing assets according to Ellen's written instructions. The trust directed that all assets be held and managed during any period of Ellen's incapacity, with income used for her care, and that no assets be distributed to beneficiaries until after her death. Upon Ellen's death, the trust directed that assets be distributed 50% to Catherine, 50% to Thomas, with specific bequests of personal items to each and a donation of $5,000 to the Public Library's book fund in memory of Michael. The trust required that Ellen's home be transferred into it through a deed change recorded with the county. Leonard had already prepared the deed. Ellen would sign it, and Leonard would file it with the Montgomery County Recorder's Office, making the transfer official and public record. Ellen signed the trust documents. She signed the deed. Leonard notarized everything. The HIPAA authorization forms were brief but specific. Ellen authorized Catherine to access all of her medical information, medical records, treatment plans, test results, and communications with healthcare providers, without restriction and without requiring Ellen's consent for each disclosure. All other individuals, specifically including Thomas Carver and Ruth Merrill, were denied access to any medical information unless Ellen provided written, dated, and witnessed consent for each specific disclosure. The form included a section for Ellen to initial, "I specifically revoke any prior HIPAA authorizations and request that all healthcare providers implement restrictions preventing the following individuals from accessing my medical information: Thomas Michael Carver, Ruth Diane Merrill." Ellen initiated. She signed. When all the documents were signed and notarized, Leonard organized them into a leather portfolio with Ellen's name embossed on the cover. He provided her with 3 complete copies of everything, one set for her personal files, one set to be provided to her healthcare providers, one set to be provided to Catherine. The next steps, Leonard said, are to implement these. You'll need to provide the advance directive and HIPAA forms to your primary care physician, to the hospital, and to any specialists you see. You'll need to provide the trust documents to your bank and investment accounts so they can retitle the accounts into the trust name. You'll need to notify your insurance companies of the trust arrangement. I can help coordinate some of this if you'd like. I can handle it, Ellen said. I'll file the deed tomorrow. It will be recorded within 3 business days. Once it's recorded, your home will be titled in the trust name. Anyone searching property records will see that change. Good. Leonard walked her to the door. You've done something very important here, he said. You've established clear boundaries and removed ambiguity. You've protected your autonomy while you're able to do so. That's exactly what these tools are designed for. Ellen thanked him. She paid the remaining balance, $1,750, by check. She carried the leather portfolio to her car and placed it on the passenger seat. She sat behind the wheel for several minutes before starting the engine, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her breath fogging the windshield. She had done it. She had created the structure. Now she needed to implement it, to notify the relevant parties, to make the protection real and enforceable. And then she needed to let Thomas and Ruth and Janelle discover what she had done. Over the next 10 days, Ellen methodically implemented every change. She started with her primary care physician. She called Dr. Patel's office and scheduled a 15-minute consultation for Friday, February 9th. When she arrived, she brought 3 copies of her new advance directive, her updated healthcare power of attorney, and her HIPAA restriction forms. Dr. Patel reviewed each document carefully. This is very comprehensive, he said. More detailed than most advance directives I see. I wanted to be clear. You've succeeded. I'll scan these into your chart immediately and send copies to the hospital. The HIPAA restrictions will be implemented today. What does that mean practically? It means that if Thomas or Ruth call requesting information about your health, we'll tell them we cannot disclose any information without your written consent. If they come to the office, we'll tell them the same thing. If there's an emergency and you're unconscious, we'll contact Catherine first. Only if we cannot reach Catherine within 48 hours will we contact the professional advocate you've designated. What if someone claims to have power of attorney? We'll require them to produce the original document. We'll verify it against what we have on file. If there's any discrepancy, we'll contact you directly if possible, or your designated agent if you're incapacitated. Ellen thanked him. She left the office feeling the first real sense of security since November. That same day, she called the hospital and asked for Marla Nguyen, the social worker who had helped her in January. Marla agreed to meet her the following Monday, February 12th, at 10 in the morning. Ellen arrived with copies of all her documents. They sat in Marla's small office, barely larger than a closet, with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window that overlooked the hospital's parking garage. Marla reviewed the documents. She made notes on a form, transcribing key information. I'll add these to your chart immediately, she said. The advance directive will override anything we have on file. The healthcare power of attorney will be flagged so that only Catherine or the professional advocate can make decisions if you're unable. The HIPAA restrictions will be added to the red banner that's already on your chart. What will the banner say now? Marla turned her computer screen so Ellen could see. The banner read, Alert. Patient makes own decisions. Verify identity with photo ID before any disclosures. Do not accept proxy changes without documented capacity evaluation. HIPAA restrictions in effect, only designated contacts may receive information. See chart for details. That will appear every time someone opens your file, Marla said. Every doctor, every nurse, every technician. They'll all see it. Ellen felt the tension in her chest ease. Thank you. You've done the right thing, Marla said. You've protected yourself while you're able to do so. That's smart, not paranoid. Ellen left the hospital at 11. She drove directly to her credit union and requested to meet with Patricia Gaines, the branch manager she had worked with in January. Patricia was available. They sat in the same small office. Ellen presented the trust documents and the deed showing her home had been transferred into the trust. I need to retitle my accounts into the trust name, Ellen said. Patricia reviewed the documents. This will take about 30 minutes to process. You'll need to sign new signature cards for each account. The account numbers will remain the same, but the legal title will change from your personal name to the trust name. They completed the process. Ellen signed new signature cards for her checking account, her savings account, and her certificate of deposit that was maturing in 6 months. Patricia provided her with updated account statements showing the new trust title. She also confirmed that the verbal password Ellen had established in January was still in effect. Anyone requesting information about these accounts will need that password, Patricia confirmed. That includes family members, even if they claim to be acting on your behalf. Ellen left the credit union at noon. She stopped at a drive-thru and ordered a chicken sandwich and a cup of coffee, eating in her car in the parking lot, watching people come and go from the grocery store next door. She spent the afternoon at home, calling her insurance companies. She updated her homeowner's insurance to reflect the trust ownership. She updated her auto insurance to list herself as trustee of the trust. She updated her health insurance to confirm that only Catherine was authorized to access information about claims or coverage. Each call took 15 to 30 minutes, navigating phone trees and security questions and transfers between departments. By evening, she had completed everything. Her home was in the trust. Her bank accounts were in the trust. Her insurance policies reflected the trust. Her medical chart contained the new directives and restrictions. Every system had been updated. Now she waited for the reaction. It came on Sunday, February 18th. Thomas stopped by in the afternoon unannounced, letting himself in with his key. Ellen was in the kitchen making tea. She heard the door open. She turned, the kettle in her hand. "You startled me," she said. "Sorry. I knocked, but you didn't answer." "I was in the kitchen. The kettle was running." Thomas stood in the doorway. "I wanted to check on you. We haven't seen you much lately." "I've been fine. Busy." "Busy with what?" Ellen poured hot water over a tea bag. "Errands. Appointments. Normal things." Thomas walked to the refrigerator. The laminated schedule was still there, but it hadn't been updated in 2 weeks. He touched it. "Are you keeping up with your medications?" "Yes." "Are you eating enough?" "Yes." "Do you need anything from the store?" "No, Thomas. I'm managing." He turned to look at her. "You seem different." "How so?" "I don't know. Distant." Ellen stirred her tea. "I'm just tired. It's winter. Everyone's tired in February." Thomas nodded slowly. He walked to the table and sat down without being invited. "I tried to check your bank balance online last week," he said. "I couldn't log in." Ellen sat across from him, holding her teacup. "Why were you trying to access my bank account?" "I wasn't accessing it. I was checking it to make sure everything was okay. But the email address I had for notifications isn't working anymore." "That's correct. I changed it." "Why?" "Because I don't need you monitoring my accounts." Thomas's expression shifted, confusion moving toward irritation. "I'm not monitoring you. I'm helping you. I don't need that kind of help." "Mom, you just had a serious illness. You're 58. You live alone. Someone should be keeping an eye on things." "I am keeping an eye on things. They're my things." Thomas stood. "This is exactly what Ruth and I were worried about." "You're not thinking clearly." Ellen set down her teacup. She looked at him directly, her voice calm and level. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. And I don't appreciate you accessing my accounts without my permission." "I had your permission. You gave me the key. You gave me the passwords. I gave you a key in case of an emergency. I did not give you permission to access my bank accounts, change my email addresses, or inquire about my credit with multiple companies." Thomas went very still. "What are you talking about?" "I received my credit report. There were 3 inquiries I didn't authorize. One of them came from you, from my credit union branch on December 22nd. I was trying to help. You were trying to gather information without my knowledge. There's a difference." Thomas's face flushed. "You're being paranoid." "I'm being accurate." He turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back. "We're just trying to take care of you. Then stop treating me like I can't take care of myself." He left without responding. Ellen heard the door close, heard his car start, heard him drive away. She sat at the table for a long time, her tea cooling in the cup. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline moving through her system even though the conversation had been controlled, factual. She had not raised her voice. She had not accused him of malicious intent. She had simply stated what happened and what she had done in response. But she knew this was not over. She knew Thomas would call Ruth. They would discuss this. They would probably decide she was being difficult, ungrateful, possibly confused. She needed to be prepared for their next move. That evening, Ellen called Catherine. It was 1 a.m. in Frankfurt, late, but Ellen needed to talk. Catherine answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "Yes. I'm sorry for calling so late. Can you talk for a few minutes?" "Of course." "What's wrong?" Ellen told her. She explained everything, the conversations she had overheard in November, the schedule, the folder, the credit inquiries, the unauthorized changes, the attorney, the new documents, the confrontation with Thomas that afternoon. She spoke for 20 minutes. Catherine listened without interrupting. When Ellen finished, Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm not surprised." "You're not. Thomas has always been controlling. He's always needed to be in charge, to be the one with the answers. And Ruth enables him. She always has. Did you know they were planning?" "I knew they were discussing you. Thomas sent me an email in December asking if I thought you should update your living will. I told him to talk to you directly. He said you were too ill to have that conversation. I told him to wait until you recovered. He never mentioned it again. They removed you from my emergency contact list." "I know. The hospital sent me a notification. I called them and they said it was changed at your request. I almost called you, but I thought maybe you had decided you wanted Thomas to be primary since he's closer. I didn't want to make you feel guilty. It wasn't at my request. I was sedated when it was changed." Catherine exhaled sharply. "Those bastards. I fixed it. You're primary again. Thomas and Ruth are restricted from accessing any of my medical information." "Good. What else do you need me to do?" "I need you to keep the documents I'm going to send you. Copies of everything, my advance directive, the healthcare power of attorney, the trust documents, all of it. If something happens to me, if I'm hospitalized or incapacitated, you'll need them. Send them tonight. I'll print them as soon as they arrive. And if Thomas or Ruth contact you claiming I'm confused or incompetent, don't believe them. I am completely competent. I have documentation from my doctor confirming it. They're going to try to override what I've done, and they'll probably use my recent illness as justification. I won't believe them. I believe you." They talked for another 15 minutes, Catherine fully awake now, asking questions about the legal process, about the fiduciary services, about whether Ellen felt safe. Ellen assured her she was safe, just protective, just ensuring boundaries. After they hung up, Ellen scanned all the documents using her home printer's scanner function, creating PDF files. She emailed them to Catherine with a subject line, "Important legal documents, print and save." She received a reply 10 minutes later, "Received. Printing now. I love you. Stay strong." Ellen shut down the computer. She walked through the house, checking locks, turning off lights. She stood in the living room in the darkness and looked at the space, the couch where Michael used to fall asleep watching baseball games, the bookshelf where she had organized decades of accumulated reading, the desk where she now kept her documentation. This was her home, her life, her autonomy, and she had defended it. The next week was quiet in a way that felt strategic rather than peaceful. No one called. No one visited. Ellen maintained her routines, morning walks, grocery shopping, library book club on Tuesday evening. She attended a lecture at the senior center about estate planning, sitting in the back row and taking notes even though she had already done everything the speaker recommended. On Saturday, February 24th, Ruth called. Her voice was careful, measured. "Can we talk?" "We're talking now. In person. Please." Ellen agreed to meet for coffee the next day, Sunday afternoon at 2, at a cafe downtown that she liked. She arrived early and chose a table near the window. Ruth arrived exactly on time, wearing a burgundy coat and carrying a large leather purse. They ordered coffee. They made small talk about the weather, about a mutual friend from church who was traveling to Florida. Then Ruth set down her cup and looked at Ellen directly. Thomas told me about your conversation last week. I assumed he would. He's hurt, Ellen. We both are. We've been trying to help you, and you're pushing us away. I'm establishing boundaries. It feels like you don't trust us. Ellen was quiet for a moment. I overheard you. In November, when I came home from the hospital, I heard you discussing my funeral, my house, splitting things fairly. I was in the next room, recovering, and you were planning my death. Ruth's face changed, color draining. We weren't planning your death. We were preparing. There's a difference. The difference is consent. You prepared without including me. You made decisions without asking me. You were sick. You needed to rest, not worry about paperwork. I was recovering, not dying. And I was never asked if I wanted your help with paperwork. Ruth's hands tightened around her coffee cup. We put together a schedule. We brought you food. We drove you to appointments. And I appreciated that. But somewhere between helping and managing, you crossed a line. You accessed my bank accounts. You changed my passwords. You blocked my daughter's calls. You discussed conservatorship. That was just research. Just being informed. About how to control me. About how to care for you if you couldn't care for yourself. Ellen leaned forward slightly. But I can care for myself. I always could. You assumed I couldn't or wouldn't be able to, and you started making plans based on that assumption. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. I thought I was being a good sister. You were being a good administrator. There's a difference. So what now? You've shut us out completely. I've established that I make my own decisions. If you can respect that, we can have a relationship. If you can't, we can't. You've removed Thomas and me from all your documents. Yes, that's extreme. It's appropriate given what you were planning. Ruth stood, gathering her coat and purse. I hope you don't regret this. I won't. Ruth left. Ellen watched her walk to her car, shoulders tight, movements quick and angry. Ellen finished her coffee slowly, watching people pass by the window, couples walking dogs, families pushing strollers, teenagers laughing in groups. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired. But she also felt clear, settled, certain. She had done what needed to be done. The boundaries were drawn. The consequences were unfolding. And she was at peace with both. March arrived cold and gray, winter refusing to release its grip. The snow had melted into mud and were frozen into ruts. Ellen's life continued in patterns that felt sustainable, even ordinary. She walked each morning, her route extending slightly as her stamina built. She volunteered one afternoon a week at the food pantry attached to her church, sorting donations and restocking shelves. She read 3 books that month, a mystery, a memoir, a novel about a woman starting over after divorce. On March 9th, she received a certified letter. The return address was a law firm in Dayton she didn't recognize, Morrison and Associates. She signed for it, the postal carrier waiting on her porch while she signed the green card. She opened it at the kitchen table. The letter was from an attorney named Robert Morrison, representing Thomas Carver. It stated that Thomas was concerned about Ellen Carver's recent behavior and decision-making capacity and was exploring legal options to ensure her welfare and safety. It requested that Ellen contact Mr. Morrison's office to discuss these concerns in a collaborative manner. Ellen read the letter twice. Then she called Leonard Jacobs. I received a letter, she said, from an attorney representing my son. He's threatening some kind of legal action. What type of action? Ellen read the relevant section aloud. Leonard was quiet for a moment. That's a pre-petition letter. He's exploring whether to file for conservatorship or guardianship. He probably consulted an attorney after your conversation last month, and the attorney advised him to send a letter before filing any petitions, to see if you'd agree to mediation or voluntary arrangement. I won't. Then he may file a petition asking the court to evaluate your capacity and potentially appoint a conservator to manage your affairs. Ellen's hands tightened on the phone. Can he do that? He can file a petition. Whether it succeeds is another matter. The court requires evidence of incapacity, medical documentation, expert testimony, pattern of behavior suggesting inability to manage affairs. You have documentation of your capacity. You have a recent assessment from your physician. You have evidence of unauthorized access to your accounts by him. You have evidence of your competence in organizing your affairs independently. His petition would be an uphill battle. What should I do? Don't respond to the letter directly. I'll draft a response on your behalf. It will state that you are represented by counsel, that you are fully competent as documented by recent medical evaluation, and that any petition for conservatorship will be vigorously contested. Will that stop him? It may. If he realizes you're prepared to fight and that you have documentation supporting your competence, he may decide it's not worth pursuing. If he does file, we'll respond with your medical documentation and the evidence of his unauthorized access to your accounts. We'll argue that his motivation is not your welfare but his desire to control your assets. How long would that process take? If he files, probably 4 to 6 months. Court dates, evaluations, hearings. It would be invasive and stressful, but you would almost certainly prevail. Ellen felt her shoulders relax slightly. Send the response letter. I will. And Ellen? Document everything from this point forward. Every contact with Thomas or Ruth. Every phone call, every email, every visit. Date, time, content. If this goes to court, that documentation will be valuable. Ellen hung up and immediately pulled out her spiral notebook. She wrote a detailed entry about the certified letter, the date it arrived, the content, her response. She added previous entries she hadn't documented formally, the confrontation with Thomas on February 18th, the coffee meeting with Ruth on February 25th, every phone call and text message. She was creating a record, a timeline, a paper trail that would demonstrate her competence, her capacity, her ability to manage her affairs and respond appropriately to threats. 2 weeks later, on March 23rd, Leonard called. Morrison withdrew the letter. He sent a brief message stating that Thomas Carver has decided not to pursue legal action at this time. At this time. Yes. Which means he could still file later. But for now, he's backed off. Ellen thanked him and hung up. She made a note in her spiral notebook, March 23, threat of legal action withdrawn. That evening, Thomas sent a brief text message, "We'll give you space." Ellen did not reply. She simply noted the message in her log and continued her evening routine, dinner, dishes, reading by the lamp in the living room. The house felt like hers again. Not because it had been reclaimed, but because it had been re-anchored. The structure was in place. The boundaries were enforced. The threats had been met and addressed. She had not fought in the traditional sense. She had documented it. She had acted. She had used systems, professionals, and legal instruments. She had responded to anticipatory control with deliberate structure. And it had been enough. By April, the tension had settled into a new equilibrium. Thomas and Ruth stayed away. Ellen maintained her routines. The house was orderly, her systems were protected, her documentation was complete. On April 14th, Ellen's birthday, she turned 59, Catherine sent flowers with a card. "Happy birthday to the strongest woman I know." Ellen placed them on the kitchen table in a vase and photographed them, sending the image to Catherine with a message, "Thank you. They're beautiful." That evening, the doorbell rang. Ellen answered to find a potted plant on the porch, a small succulent in a ceramic pot. A card was attached. "Happy birthday. We're here if you need us. Thomas and Ruth." Ellen brought the plant inside and placed it on the windowsill. She did not call to thank them. She simply acknowledged the gesture and left it at that. In May, Ellen received a letter from the Montgomery County Recorder's office confirming that the deed transferring her home into her trust had been officially recorded. The property was now titled Ellen M. Carver, trustee of the Ellen M. Carver Revocable Living Trust, dated February 6, 2024. Ellen filed the letter in her leather portfolio with the other documents. In June, she received her updated property tax bill in the new trust name. She paid it online, noting in her records that the system had been updated successfully. In July, she attended a wedding, a second cousin's daughter, a young woman Ellen barely knew but felt obligated to acknowledge. Thomas and Ruth were also there. They maintained polite distance, greeting Ellen briefly, making small talk about the weather and the ceremony, then moving on to other conversations. Ellen did not try to repair the relationship. She did not apologize. She had nothing to apologize for. By August, Ellen had settled into a life that felt complete, self-directed, autonomous. She walked 3 miles most mornings. She volunteered twice a week at the food pantry. She attended her book club religiously. She managed her bills, her medications, her appointments without assistance or oversight. She lived. In October, the leaves on the maple tree out front turned gold and orange and red, brilliant in the autumn sun. Ellen raked them into piles, working slowly over 2 afternoons, filling 6 large paper bags that she set by the curb for collection. Catherine visited for 10 days in mid-October, flying in on a Thursday afternoon. Ellen picked her up from the airport. They drove home with the windows cracked, the October air cool and perfect. Catherine asked how Ellen was. Ellen said she was well, completely well. They spent the week doing ordinary things, cooking meals together, walking through the neighborhood, shopping at the farmer's market, watching old movies on television. They did not talk extensively about the events of the past year. Those were settled, documented, resolved. On Saturday morning, Catherine made pancakes while Ellen sat at the kitchen table with coffee, reading the newspaper. The sunlight came through the window at an angle that lit the room gold. The refrigerator hummed. The furnace ticked on. "This feels right," Catherine said, flipping a pancake. "It does," Ellen agreed. On Sunday afternoon, before Catherine's flight back to Frankfurt, they sat in the living room with tea. Catherine asked if Ellen was happy. Ellen thought about the question. "I'm oriented," she said. "I know where I am. I know who I am. I know what's mine. That's better than being happy." Catherine smiled. "I think that is happy, actually. Just a different version." They hugged at the airport curb. Catherine promised to call that weekend. Ellen promised to answer. Ellen drove home through the October afternoon, the sky clear and blue, the leaves swirling across the road in patterns that looked choreographed. She pulled into her driveway. She unlocked her door. She stepped inside. The house was quiet. The furniture was familiar. The light fell through the windows at the same angles it had fallen for 26 years. Ellen walked to the kitchen and filled the kettle. She set it on the stove and waited for it to boil. She thought about the year that had passed, November to October, pneumonia to autumn, management to autonomy. She thought about the conversations overheard, the documents discovered, the systems accessed, the boundaries crossed. She thought about the response, the documentation, the attorneys, the protective flags, the trust, the deed, the new directives. She thought about how close she had come to losing control without realizing it was slipping, how the shift had been gradual, incremental, disguised as help. And she thought about how she had stopped it. Not with confrontation. Not with accusations. Not with anger. But with precision, with structure, with documentation that could not be dismissed or explained away. The kettle whistled. Ellen poured water over a tea bag and carried the cup to the table. She sat by the window and looked out at the maple tree, at the few remaining leaves clinging to the upper branches, at the way the afternoon light made them glow. Some Sundays, she still heard the chairs slide in memory. She still heard the words, arrangements, DNR, split fairly. But the sound no longer caught in her chest. It no longer tightened her hands. It was simply information, stored and resolved, part of a story that had ended the way she needed it to end. She was not angry. She was not bitter. She was oriented. The baby monitor lived in a drawer in the guest room closet, beneath extra towels and an electric blanket Catherine had used during her visit. The cord was coiled neatly, the receiver wrapped in a plastic bag, the transmitter beside it, the batteries removed and stored separately so they wouldn't corrode. Everything looked as if it might be used again, kept carefully in case of future need. But Ellen did not plan to use it. She had no need to surveil, to record, to document in secret. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to be filed had been filed. Everything that needed to be protected had been protected. The recordings existed on a thumb drive in her desk, labeled and dated. The thumb drive existed in the leather portfolio with the other documents. The portfolio existed in the top drawer, accessible but not visible. That was enough. The evidence existed. The structure existed. The boundaries existed. And that was sufficient. In November, a year after the pneumonia, Ellen attended her annual checkup with Dr. Patel. He reviewed her chart, listened to her lungs, checked her blood pressure, reviewed her medications. Everything was stable. Everything was normal. He noted that she had lost 5 pounds since last year, but her weight was still within healthy range. He asked if she was eating well. She said yes. He asked if she was active. She said she walked 3 miles most days. He smiled and said whatever she was doing, keep doing it. At the end of the appointment, he glanced at his computer screen. I see the protective note is still on your chart. Yes. Do you want it removed? Ellen considered this. The threat had passed. Thomas had withdrawn. Ruth had kept her distance. There had been no further attempts to access her accounts, change her passwords, modify her emergency contacts. But precautions were not negotiable. Boundaries were not temporary. No, Ellen said. Leave it. Dr. Patel nodded. All right. It stays. Ellen drove home. The sky was overcast, the air cold, November reasserting itself. She turned on the heat in the car and drove slowly, the way she always did, signaling at every turn, checking her mirrors, obeying every traffic law. At home, she made soup, chicken and vegetables, simmered for an hour, the kitchen filling with warmth and the smell of herbs. She ate at the table by the window, watching the afternoon fade into evening. She washed her dishes. She wiped the counter. She swept the floor. She sat in the living room with a book. She read for an hour. Then she set the book aside and simply sat, her hands folded in her lap, watching the streetlight outside cast shadows on the wall. The house sounded like itself. The furnace ticked on with its familiar rhythm. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen, cycling through its eternal routine. The clock on the mantel marked the seconds with a soft, steady click that had counted time for 26 years. Ellen closed her eyes. She breathed in slowly through her nose, feeling her lungs expand fully, no resistance, no tightness, no reminder of illness. She breathed out through her mouth, feeling her body settle into the chair, into the room, into the space that was hers. She was still here. In December, Ellen received a Christmas card from Ruth. It was nearly identical to last year's, snowflakes and gold foil, with a printed message inside, wishing you peace and joy this season. Ruth had signed her name at the bottom. Nothing more. Ellen placed it on the mantel alongside cards from neighbors, from Catherine, from 2 women from the book club. She did not send one in return. She acknowledged the gesture for what it was, an attempted détente at maintaining the appearance of family connection, and left it at that. Thomas called once in January, on Ellen's birthday month, though not on her actual birthday. How are you? He asked, his voice neutral, careful. Fine, Ellen said. And you? Good. Busy at work. Janelle sends her regards. Thank her for me. There was a pause. We're thinking of visiting in the spring. If that's all right, let me know when. I will. They hung up. Ellen returned to her crossword puzzle, filling in 3 more words before setting her pen down. She looked at the phone, at the blank screen now that the call had ended. She thought about the phrase, if that's all right, the way it requested permission, acknowledged her authority, recognized the boundary. Permission requested. Boundary acknowledged. Balance maintained. She finished her tea. She rinsed the cup. She walked to the back bedroom and looked out the window at the yard. The grass was brown and dormant, the chain-link fence still sagging where the post had shifted. She had meant to repair it in spring and had not. Perhaps this spring. Perhaps she would plant tomatoes in the raised bed she had built years ago. Perhaps she would paint the front door blue, the color she had imagined months ago, a signal of renewal, of change, of continuing. She had time. She had clarity. She had control. By February, Ellen had lived through 1 full cycle of seasons since the pneumonia, November to February, autumn to winter to spring to summer to autumn to winter again. The calendar had made a complete revolution. The maple tree had shed its leaves and grown them back and shed them again. The snow had come and melted and come again. And Ellen remained. Oriented. Autonomous. Living according to her own design, her own timing, her own requirements. She walked through her house one evening in late February, moving slowly through each room, not searching for anything, simply acknowledging the space. The living room where Michael used to fall asleep watching baseball. The kitchen where she had overheard the conversations that changed everything. The bedroom where she had lain recovering, where she had listened through the vent, where she had understood the truth of what was being planned around her. She stood in the doorway of the back bedroom and looked at the heating vent near the floor, the vent that had carried voices so clearly, the vent that had been both threat and evidence, the means of her discovering and the source of her knowledge. She thought about that afternoon in November, about lying still and listening, about the moment when care revealed itself as control, when help showed its edges, when family demonstrated its limits. She thought about everything that had followed, the documentation, the attorneys, the protective flags, the trust, the new directives, the boundaries drawn and enforced. She thought about the cost of it, the distance from Thomas and Ruth, the formality that had replaced familiarity, the legal structure where trust used to be. And she thought about the alternative, what would have happened if she had not listened, if she had not documented, if she had not acted. She would have woken one day to find her accounts managed by someone else, her home decisions made by committee, her medical wishes interpreted rather than followed. She would have been managed into compliance, prepared into passivity, cared for into irrelevance. No, she had chosen correctly. She had protected what mattered. She had maintained her autonomy while she still had the capacity to defend it. Ellen turned from the doorway. She walked to the kitchen and sat at the table. The house was quiet around her. The furnace ticked. The refrigerator hummed. The clock counted time. She was not angry. Anger required ongoing investment in a past that had been resolved. She was not bitter. Bitterness required believing something had been taken that could not be reclaimed. She was oriented. She knew where she was. She knew who she was. She knew what hers was. And that was enough. The next morning, Ellen woke at 6:30. She made coffee. She dressed in layers, long underwear, sweatpants, a fleece jacket, and laced her walking shoes. She stepped out into the February cold and began her route, her breath visible, her stride steady. She walked past the elementary school, past the small park, past the row of bungalows. She walked 3 miles, completing the loop in 45 minutes, arriving back at her house as the sun was rising over the trees. She unlocked her door. She stepped inside. She removed her jacket and shoes. She poured a second cup of coffee and sat by the window with the newspaper. The morning unfolded in its usual pattern. Bills needed to be paid on the 1st. Prescriptions needed to be refilled on the 10th. Trash needed to go out on Thursday. The book club met on Tuesday. The food pantry needed volunteers on Friday. Life continued. Ordinary. Organized. Autonomous. Ellen finished her coffee. She rinsed the cup. She walked to her desk and opened the leather portfolio. She reviewed the documents inside, her advance directive, her healthcare power of attorney, her financial power of attorney, her trust documents, her deed, her HIPAA authorizations. Everything is in order. Everything is current. Everything protecting the life she had chosen to live on her own terms. She closed the portfolio and returned it to the drawer. The sun climbed higher. The morning advanced. The day opened before her like every day opened, with possibility, with routine, with the quiet dignity of a life lived deliberately. Ellen stood by the window and looked out at the maple tree, at its bare branches against the gray February sky, at the promise of spring contained in every dormant bud, waiting for the right moment to unfold. She was waiting too. Not for rescue. Not for resolution. Not for anything outside herself. She was simply here, present, oriented, living each day as it came, making each decision as it arose, maintaining the boundaries she had established, protecting the autonomy she had defended. When the furnace ticked on, The house responded with familiar sounds, the settling of old wood, the expansion of metal ducts, the circulation of warm air through rooms that had held decades of life, of love, of loss, of continuation. Ellen listened. She heard the house. She heard herself in it, her breath, her heartbeat, her existence. And it sounded like home. She turned from the window. She walked to the kitchen. She began preparing lunch, a simple meal, soup and bread, enough for one. She moved through the familiar motions, her hands steady, her mind clear, her purpose certain. She had survived pneumonia. She had survived planning that excluded her. She had survived attempts to manage her future before her present had ended. And now she lived. Not in reaction to threat. Not in defense of boundaries. Not in the shadow of what had almost happened. She lived in the light of what was a woman in her 59th year, alone but not lonely, autonomous but not isolated, connected by choice rather than obligation, protected by structure rather than dependence. The soup simmered. The bread warmed. The afternoon stretched ahead with its ordinary demands and simple pleasures. Ellen sat at her table and ate slowly, tasting each spoonful, feeling the warmth spread through her chest, nourishing the body that had recovered, the person who remained, the life that continued. Outside, a bird landed on the fence. Inside, the clock kept time. Between them, Ellen existed present, oriented, whole. And it was enough. It had always been enough. It would continue to be enough for as long as she chose to make it so. The afternoon faded into evening. The evening faded into night. The night gave way to morning. And Ellen moved through it all with the steady rhythm of someone who knew exactly where she was, exactly who she was, and exactly how she had gotten there. She had put doors back on their hinges. She had restored the house to itself. And in doing so, she had restored herself, not to what she had been before the pneumonia, before the planning, before the threat, but to something stronger, clearer, more deliberately constructed. She was not the woman they had tried to manage. She was the woman who had managed her own defense, her own protection, her own continuing. And that woman, that person, that life, it was hers. Completely. Irrevocably. Hers. The furnace ticked. The house breathed. Ellen lived. And in the living, in the breathing, in the ticking of ordinary time, there was justice. Quiet justice. The kind that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't require witnesses, that exists simply in the restoration of what should have been all along. Control in her own hands. Decisions in her own mind. Life on her own terms. That was the story. That was the victory. That was the end that sounded like the beginning. The house settled into the night. The streetlight glowed outside. The room fell dark except for the small lamp Ellen left on in the kitchen, the same lamp she had left on for 26 years, a beacon saying someone was home, someone was present, someone remained. Ellen climbed into bed. She pulled the quilt up to her shoulders. She closed her eyes. And she slept the sleep of someone who knew, without doubt, that when morning came, she would wake in her own home, in her own bed, living her own life, exactly as she had chosen. The last sound of the night was the furnace clicking off, its work completed, the house warm enough, the temperature right. And in that silence, Ellen rested. Every story here will stir your soul. Welcome to Spice and Sugar, your daily escape into real emotions, bold lives, and unforgettable lessons. Here, it's all about love, loss, laughter, and the quiet strength that carries us through. I share stories that make you feel, that remind you you're not alone, that every bitter moment can lead to something sweet. If you want to laugh, cry, and see life through stories that heal and inspire, subscribe and stay a while.